bruised, lacking arms from the West. Is it finally ready to sit down again?
Well, to mark the second anniversary of the outbreak of the war, special sessions have been held at the United Nations in New York. Russia's ambassador told the chamber that Ukraine never needed to pay such a high price.
What has this year brought to Ukraine? There are hundreds of thousands of senseless victims, the impending collapse of the economy, and the deepest crisis of statehood as the complete incapacity and lack of independence of the leadership in Kiev become more and more obvious to the people of Ukraine. The young and now not young generations are being rounded up on the street like cattle and thrown into meat grinders designed to show Western sponsors that their investments are paying off. It is obvious that no European future is in sight for the corrupt, criminal Ukraine, with its impoverished population, which the current puppet leadership has turned into a breadbasket. A representative of the British puppeteers of the Kiev regime asked in this hall whether it was a pity for us to send our sons to fight in Ukraine. Of course it is. Pity for the unfortunate Ukrainians who are being sent to die for the geopolitical interests of the West. But the British representative, in the traditional Western hypocritical manner, kept silent about the fact we did not do this 2 years ago to start the war, but to stop it.
The UN General Assembly meeting was followed up by a meeting of the United Nations Security Council, the 15-member body that leads the UN. And the Security Council meeting also focused on that 2-year anniversary of Russia's special military operation. Now, Russian Ambassador Nebenzia took to the floor of the Security Council and laid out the reasons for the special military operation, how it was a result of long-standing efforts by the United States to destabilize Ukraine and keep Ukraine in a conflict, the ignoring of the Minsk agreement, other factors. He also emphasized that Ukraine is losing the war, but they're not alone in taking these losses.
Paying for their interests with the lives of today's native Ukrainians, as they believe, the West, led by the United States, with the best neo-colonial traditions, is trying to solve its geopolitical problems and prevent Washington from losing its self-appointed role of world hegemon, or to strengthen other powerful and self-sufficient poles in the world. Be that as it may, today it is already obvious that in this proxy war of the United States, the European Union, and NATO against Russia with the hands of Ukrainians, Ukraine is losing. And what is no less important, no matter how hard it may be for our European colleagues to accept this conclusion, is that they are not the only losers of this conflict, because the European Union itself is almost the main loser. Does the population of European countries need it? I would like to believe that they do not. A public opinion poll conducted in January in 12 European countries shows that only 10% of Europeans believe that Ukraine can defeat Russia. European farmers are revolting, not wanting to lose their agricultural markets due to dumping by Ukrainian exporters.
Now, the U.S. and U.K. representatives repeated their usual mantra, blaming Russia for the entire conflict, giving a very simplistic explanation of how the conflict began, blaming it all squarely on Russia. Now, 2 non-permanent members of the Security Council, representing African nations, Algeria and Mozambique, spoke very differently than the U.S. and the United Kingdom. In their remarks, they emphasized the need for negotiation to resolve the conflict.
Mozambique firmly advocates a political and a negotiated solution as the most viable way to end the conflict. This is the solid path for a lasting and sustainable peace between the 2 sister countries and the 2 neighboring countries.
It is high time to deploy the necessary diplomatic effort to achieve de-escalation of tension. The concerned parties must show their willingness and readiness to engage in an inclusive and constructive dialogue.
It wasn't just the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly that commemorated the 2-year anniversary of the special military operation. In addition to that, the White House imposed a huge new sweeping round of sanctions onto Russia in response to the 2-year anniversary of the conflict. However, these sanctions, while they were targeting Russia, were not only imposed on that country. They were not only imposed on Russia, they were imposed on a number of different countries that were affected.
U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control targeted 26 third country entities and individuals in 11 countries, including the People's Republic of China, Serbia, the United Arab Emirates, and Liechtenstein.
China, speaking before the Security Council, specifically called out these sanctions and how they are getting in the way of potentially building a road toward peace and better cooperation between countries. China had a rather negative assessment of this recent move by the White House.
The situation in which Europe finds itself today is directly related to the constant expansion of NATO since the end of the Cold War. We call on NATO to analyze and move away from the mental psychology of war and to refrain from fueling regional instability and provoking problems. We oppose the illegal sanctions that have been imposed on Chinese companies by the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union because they use the Ukrainian issue as a pretext. It is necessary to actively advocate for the multipolarization of our world, and a fair one at that. The Cold War ended more than 30 years ago.
A special anniversary, 2 years since the special military operation of Russia began in Ukraine. However, Russia and its diplomats made a point of pointing out the true causes of the conflict. The conflict is rooted in big efforts by the United States to overturn the sovereignty of Ukraine and turn Ukraine into a proxy through which to harm Russia. There was the Euromaidan coup. There was the disregarding of the Minsk agreement, the ongoing bombing and shelling of Donetsk and Lugansk. And all of this led to a situation where Russia felt that the situation required a special military operation, and it was unavoidable that they move in, recognize the new republics, and protect them from Ukraine's ongoing aggression. Russia made a point of highlighting this version of events and not letting Western leaders, with their very simplistic and one-sided narrative, go unopposed. Russia made a point of telling the world what Western media has refused to let the world know, and using this particular anniversary to spread the truth amid lots of deceptions regarding the conflict in Ukraine.
Meanwhile, almost 2 years to the day later, the EU has slapped even more sanctions on Russia. As it stands, more than 2,000 individuals and entities are now branded by the bloc as, quote, threats to Ukraine's independence. But the new measures make up the 13th sanctions package against Russia. The latest names added to the list face asset freezes, travel bans and trade restrictions. But they don't just target Russian firms, with companies in India, Sri Lanka, China, Serbia, Thailand, Kazakhstan, even NATO ally Turkey also affected. In response, Moscow's banned several EU representatives from the country.
The European Union continues its fruitless attempts to put pressure on Russia through unilateral restrictive measures. On February 23rd, EU countries adopted the next 13th sanctions package. We consider such actions of the European Union illegal, undermining the international legal prerogatives of the United Nations Security Council.
So you might be asking why.